The crystal shattered before anyone could blink. 1 second it was in the waiter's hand. The next it was across the marble floor in 100 pieces. And the most dangerous man in Eastern Europe hadn't even raised his voice. He simply pointed at the door. That waiter was gone in 30 seconds. The second one lasted 4 minutes. The third one walked out crying. And the entire staff of the Kensington Royal stood frozen because no one, not one trained professional in that building, could survive table 4. No one, except a broke invisible waitress named Livia, who opened her mouth and changed everything. If you are watching this right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you have not subscribed, yet hit that button and stay until the very end, because what happens between Livia and this man will stay with you for a long time. The envelope had been sitting on Livia Young's kitchen counter for 6 days. She had not thrown it away. She had not opened it again after the first time. She just walked past it every morning and every night, that bright red final notice from her landlord, and she reminded herself that panic was a luxury she could not afford. She was 27 years old. She had $214 in her bank account. Her mother was gone. Her scholarship was gone. And in 24 hours, if tonight's tips did not come through, her apartment would be gone too. So Livia did what she always did. She put on her uniform. She fixed her hair in the reflection of a dark window, and she walked through the service door of the Kensington Royal like she owned the place. Because pretending you owned the place was the only thing that kept you standing when everything else was falling apart. The smell hit her the moment she stepped inside. Truffle oil, aged cognac, and underneath all of it something sharper. Something that smelled like fear. "You are late, Young." Preston Giles appeared from behind the host stand like a bad dream in a too tight suit. He held his tablet like a weapon and his expression like a judge reading a verdict. "I am 3 minutes early, Preston," Livia said quietly, punching in her time code without looking at him. "You are late in spirit." He looked her up and down with the specific kind of contempt that small men reserve for people they cannot intimidate. "Fix your collar. Tonight is not the night for your particular brand of mediocrity. We have a VIP arriving at 8. The entire East Wing is reserved. East Wing only. You are on the terrace." "Who is it?" Preston leaned in. His eyes had that particular glaze, half reverence, half genuine terror. "Victor Molnar." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Even Livia, who had not owned a television in 2 years, knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Victor Molnar was the kind of man whose biography existed in whispers rather than newspapers. Born in Budapest. Built his first shipping route at 22. By 30, he controlled ports across 4 countries. By 40, no one in Eastern Europe moved anything goods, money, information without his knowledge. The tabloids called him the Steel Wolf. People who had actually met him called him something they usually only said when they were certain he was not in the room. He was also, if the darker rumors were true, the kind of man whose business interests extended into territories that did not appear on any tax document or corporate filing. "The Molnar?" Livia asked. "The same." Preston straightened his jacket as though preparing for battle. "He is in London for the G20 summit sidelines. He chose us. If this evening goes perfectly, this restaurant receives a Michelin star recommendation from his private circle. If it goes badly, I will make certain you never work in this city again. Do you understand me? Stay out of the East Wing. You are on the terrace. Gregory handles Molnar." Gregory, the head waiter. The man who polished his shoes between courses and spoke with a fake French accent he had been cultivating for 11 years. Preston's prized possession. "Understood," Livia said. She went to the terrace. The first hour was ordinary. Tourists celebrating anniversaries. A group of minor influencers photographing their appetizers from 17 different angles. Livia poured wine, cleared plates, smiled until her jaw ached, and ran the math in her head with every table. Table 12, 10%. Table 14, 15. She was still short. She was always still short. At 7:55, the restaurant changed. It was not something she could point to. It was atmospheric, like a drop in air pressure before a storm. The music did not get quieter, but it felt quieter. The kitchen noise faded, the front doors swung open, and every person in the building, whether they realized it or not, stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. Victor Molnar walked in. He was taller than the photographs suggested. Broader. He moved through the room the way certain men move, as though the space rearranged itself around him, rather than the other way around. He wore a black tailored suit that had clearly been made specifically for his body, for the width of his shoulders, and the particular way he carried his weight. Beneath the jacket, a white dress shirt open at the collar, no tie. And across the exposed skin of his neck, climbing toward his jaw, and disappearing under the fabric of his shirt, were tattoos. Dark, dense, deliberate. They covered his neck, reappeared along his forearms, where he had pushed the sleeves back slightly, and told a story in ink that no press release ever would. His hair was brown, swept back from his face, with the kind of precision that looked effortless, and was not. His beard was trimmed close, neat, the same dark brown. His eyes were the color of ice over deep water. He did not smile when he entered. He scanned the room once the way a man scans a room when he has spent enough of his life in rooms where someone might be waiting to make a problem for him. Then he walked to the east wing table by the fireplace, sat down, placed a black phone on the table, and checked his watch. Preston materialized beside Gregory and hissed something Livia could not hear. Gregory straightened his spine, picked up a silver pitcher, and approached with the careful confidence of a man who had been told he was exceptional. So many times, he had started to believe it. Livia watched from the terrace doorway. Gregory poured the water. He did it with what he clearly believed was elegance. He stepped back. He waited for acknowledgement. Victor looked at the glass. Then he looked up at Gregory. Ice. The word was soft, accented, and heavy with something that was not quite anger, but was considerably worse. Sir, Gregory said. I did not ask for ice, Victor said. Why is there ice in my glass? It is standard procedure, sir. The water is chilled too. Get out. Gregory blinked. I beg your pardon. Victor did not repeat himself. He simply looked toward the bodyguards who had stationed themselves near the entrance. Two men who looked like architecture, and Gregory understood. He was gone before Preston could reach the table. Preston made it there in time to see Victor pick up the glass, open his hand, and let it fall. The crash echoed like a gunshot through the suddenly silent restaurant. I'm so sorry, Mr. Molnar. Preston was already sweating through his collar. A terrible mistake. Timothy, you're up. Timothy was 23 years old and had been a junior waiter for 4 months. He was shoved toward table 4 with shaking hands and a laminated specials card that he was clearly reading for the first time in his life. Livia watched him approach. She watched him begin to speak. She watched Victor interrupt him with a quiet question about the sourcing of the venison, and she watched Timothy open his mouth, close it, look at his notepad, look back up, and say nothing at all. The bodyguard stepped forward. Timothy left at a speed that suggested he was late for a bus he had no intention of missing. The dining room was completely, utterly silent. At the server station near the kitchen entrance, Preston Giles was doing something that Livia could only describe as slowly unraveling. He was tugging at his collar. He was checking his tablet and putting it down and picking it up again. He was making the specific expression of a man who could feel his career leaving his body. He is going to walk out, Preston whispered to no one. He is going to walk out, and he is going to post about it, and we are finished. We are completely finished. Livia set down her tray. She had been watching Victor Molnar for 10 minutes, and she had noticed something the others had not. He was not simply angry, he was exhausted. The tension in his jaw was not the performance of a powerful man enjoying his own power. It was the specific tension of someone fighting something they could not say out loud. Someone whose mind was somewhere else entirely, while his body sat in an expensive restaurant waiting for an evening to end. She noticed the phone on the table, the tiny light blinking. A call live, but muted. She noticed the document on the screen. She noticed the language it was written in. Preston? Livia said. He spun around. Absolutely not. You have no one left. Young, I will not send a terrace waitress to. Gregory is hiding in the walk-in freezer, Livia said calmly. I watched him go in 15 minutes ago. Timothy is in the alley. If you do not send someone to that table in the next 30 seconds, Victor Molnar stands up, walks out, and the last thing this restaurant is known for is the night it failed to provide a glass of water without incident. Preston stared at her. He stared at table 4. He looked like a man swallowing something that was not food. If you embarrass me, he said finally, his voice dropping to something that was almost a threat, do not bother clocking out. Just go. Livia smoothed her apron. She picked up a fresh menu, and she walked toward table 4. The walk felt longer than it was. She was aware of every eye in the room, the other guests who had gone very quiet and very still, the kitchen staff peering through the pass-through window, Preston behind her practically vibrating. She stopped 3 feet from the table. She did not speak. She waited. Victor did not look up. He was staring at his phone, his jaw set, his finger tapping a slow, rhythmic pattern on the white tablecloth that she recognized immediately as a nervous habit rather than impatience. "If you are here to tell me about the soup," he muttered, his accent thick and low, "save your breath. I want a vodka neat, and I want everyone to stop looking at me as though I am a problem to be managed." Livia did not write anything down. She was looking at the phone screen, at the document that was open on it, at the language it was written in, which was not English, was not Russian, was not the standard Hungarian she had encountered in a linguistics textbook at Oxford. It was the dense, specific legal dialect of the Carpathian Basin, old contracts, old borders. The language her grandmother had refused to stop speaking in their house in South London for 18 years, the language that had been the soundtrack of every evening, every argument, every story, every meal of Livia's entire childhood. The phone buzzed. Victor unmuted it without looking up, apparently either forgetting or not caring that she was standing there. A man's voice erupted from the speaker, rapid and urgent. "Victor, they have the leverage. The board votes in 50 minutes. If you do not have the grandfather clause signatures, the merger is dead. They will strip the assets. Do you hear me? Everything." Victor replied in the same language, his voice dropping to something that was barely above a growl. "I am in London. The papers were supposed to be here. The courier was held at Heathrow. And I am surrounded by people who cannot manage a glass of water without creating a disaster. You need to stall. Eat something. Do not let them see you sweat. I cannot eat. My stomach is in knots. The menu is pretentious garbage." A pause. Something quieter underneath the anger. "I just want something real. I want to sit somewhere and not feel like the world is about to end." He slammed the phone back to mute and looked up. He looked at Livia with the flat, cold expectation of a man who had been disappointing people all evening and had accepted it as the tone of the night. "Well," he said in English. Livia looked at him. She thought about her grandmother, about the particular voice Ava had used when Livia was small and scared, firm and warm and absolutely certain. She thought about the rent notice on her counter. She thought about how much she had to lose. Then she took a breath and spoke, not in English. "A vodka on an empty stomach when you are fighting a board war," Livia said in perfect, unbroken Hungarian, "is not a strategic move. It is a surrender. And you do not look like a man who surrenders, Mr. Molnar." The silence that followed was the loudest silence she had ever stood inside. The pen slipped from Victor Molnar's hand. He stared at her, not with anger, not with the flat dismissal he had given everyone else that evening. He stared at her with the expression of a man who has just heard something he was absolutely certain he would not hear in a place he was absolutely certain he was safe in, a language he had never once in his life in London been caught off guard in. "What did you say?" he whispered in Hungarian. His voice was different. The steel was still there, but underneath it something had cracked open just slightly. Something that sounded to Livia's very well-trained ear like recognition. She stepped closer. She shifted her dialect slightly, softening toward the eastern border accent. The sound of her grandmother's kitchen, the sound of something old and specific and home. "I said that you need clarity right now, not liquor, and you need something to eat that does not taste like it was assembled by someone who has never been hungry." Victor looked around the room. Then he looked back at her name tag, then back at her face. "Who are you?" he said. "You are a waitress in London. How do you speak the dialect of the eastern counties?" "My grandmother was Ava Kovac," Livia said. "She raised me. She refused to speak English in the house for 18 years. Something moved through Victor Molnar's face that was not quite an emotion and was not quite the absence of one. It was the specific expression of a person who has just heard a name from a world they thought they had completely left behind. "You speak it like someone who learned it as a first language," he said. "I did," Livia said. "My grandmother said English was for strangers, Hungarian was for family." Victor picked up the pen he had dropped. He set it down again deliberately. He looked at her with something that was finally unmistakably human. "Everyone here is terrified of me," he said. "I noticed," Livia said. "You are not." She met his eyes directly. Her knees were shaking. Her hands were steady. "I am broke, Mr. Molnar. I need this job. I need tonight's tips. I do not have the luxury of being terrified of you when I have a landlord who is considerably more immediate. He held her gaze for 10 full seconds. Behind her, Preston had stopped breathing entirely. From where he stood, he could see the body language, the closeness, the billionaire leaning slightly forward, the waitress not stepping back. He could not hear a single word. He did not understand what was happening. He just watched. Then Victor Molnar threw his head back and laughed. It was a raw, unexpected sound. The kind of laugh that had not been used in a long time, and showed it. "Fine," he said, dropping back into Hungarian, leaning forward like a man sharing a secret. "Forget the menu. What can this place actually offer a man who is tired of pretending things are fancy when they are not?" "The sous chef is Polish," Livia said. "He makes a staff stew that is not on the menu. Potato-heavy paprika, tough cuts of beef, real pepper. It is not elegant, but it is warm, and it is honest." Victor stared at her. "Paprikash real, paprikash. I will make him add the dumplings." Something in his face went very quiet. Not the dangerous quiet of before. A different kind. The quiet of a person remembering something they had not thought about in years. "Bring it," he said. "And the vodka?" Livia asked. "Bring that too." His mouth curved slightly, the ghost of something that was not quite a smile. "I am celebrating finding an intelligent human being in this city. That is worth a drink." Livia turned and walked back toward the kitchen. As she passed Preston, he grabbed her arm. "What happened?" he hissed. "Why did he laugh? Is he leaving? What did you say to him?" "He is staying," Livia said, pulling her arm free. "Tell the kitchen to pull the staff stew, large bowl, and tell Jean-Luc to add the dumplings, or I will tell Mr. Molnar it was his idea to refuse." Preston looked at her as though she had just suggested something criminal. "The staff stew. You cannot serve a man like Victor Molnar." "Do it, Preston," Livia said. And something in her voice, something that had not been there an hour ago, made him do it. She pushed through the kitchen doors alone. Her heart was running at a speed she was not sure was sustainable. She had done it. She had reached him. She had bought herself time and the table, and maybe the tips that would save the next 30 days of her life. But as she stood at the pass waiting for the bowl, something else settled over her. Something colder. She had heard the phone call. She knew about the board vote, the missing signatures the courier stuck at Heathrow. She knew Victor Molnar was not just a powerful man having a difficult dinner. He was a man in the middle of a war, and wars in her experience never stayed contained to the people who started them. She did not know yet how right she was. She was still standing at the pass watching steam rise from the bowl when the front doors of the Kensington Royal opened again, and the men who walked in did not look like they were there for dinner. They were not loud. That was the first thing Livia noticed. Dangerous men rarely were. The first one was older, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a year. He moved through the entrance of the Kensington Royal the way people moved through spaces they intended to own, not visiting, not dining, acquiring. His smile was wide and warm and did not reach his eyes by a significant margin. Behind him was a younger man carrying a leather briefcase with the specific grip of someone who knew exactly what was inside it and exactly what it was worth. Preston appeared from nowhere, bowing with the mechanical desperation of a man who had been bowing all evening and had forgotten how to stop. "Welcome, gentlemen. Do you have a reservation? I can seat you immediately in our—" The older man walked past him without breaking stride. He walked directly toward table 4. Livia stood at the kitchen past the steaming bowl of staff stew in her hands and watched Arthur Pendleton cross the dining room with the unhurried confidence of a man who had already won an argument he had not yet started. "Victor." Pendleton's voice filled the room. Warm, expansive. The voice of a man performing friendship for an audience. "I didn't think I'd find you eating soup. I assumed you'd already be on a plane to Zurich." Victor set down his spoon. He did not stand. He took his time pressing the linen napkin to his mouth, setting it folded on the table. And then he looked up at Pendleton, the way a man looks at something he has been expecting and is not remotely surprised by. "Arthur." His English was crisp. Cold in a completely different way from the warmth he had shown Livia 2 minutes ago. "I wasn't aware the Kensington Royal had relaxed its standards enough to admit snakes. I'll have to speak to management about the health code." Pendleton laughed. It was a practiced laugh, the kind kept in a drawer for exactly these moments. He pulled out the chair across from Victor without being invited and sat down. The younger man, the lawyer, positioned himself at the edge of the table and set the briefcase down with a weight that was deliberate. A statement. "We need to talk." Pendleton said, the warmth evaporating so quickly it was almost impressive. "The board is sitting in 40 minutes. You don't have the grandfather clause. Your courier is detained. You're out of options, Victor, and I think you know it." "I have the papers," Victor said. "They are being processed. Your courier was detained at Heathrow." Pendleton said it gently, the way people deliver information they arrange themselves. "We made a call. A tip to customs. Undeclared assets, very unfortunate. He'll be there for days." The dining room was quiet enough that Livia, crossing the floor toward table 4 with the bowl, could hear every word. She watched Victor's hand close into a fist under the table. She watched the muscle in his jaw tighten. He was absorbing it, recalculating. The way a man does when the ground shifts under him and falling is not something he is willing to accept. "Sign the transfer, Victor," Pendleton said, and nodded to the lawyer who opened the briefcase. "Sell Molnar Industries to Apex Global. Fair price. Immediate liquidity. You walk away tonight a free man. No board fight, no public spectacle, no legacy dragged through a bankruptcy filing." He slid a thick document across the table. "Standard terms. Very clean." Victor looked at the document. He did not pick it up. Livia reached the table. She set the bowl down in front of Victor without a word, refilled his water glass, and positioned herself to refill Pendleton's as well, moving with the specific invisibility of a person whose job has trained them to not exist in the room. She was 3 feet from the document. She was 2 feet from the lawyer's hand, and she was listening with everything she had. Pendleton and the lawyer exchanged a look. Then, comfortable in the assumption that the waitress was furniture, and Victor was the only person at the table worth speaking carefully around, they dropped into Hungarian. "He's breaking," Pendleton said, low and conversational. "Look at his eyes. He hasn't slept." "He hasn't read page 7, the lawyer murmured back. "He won't see clause 14 until after he signs." "What does clause 14 do?" Pendleton asked, though his expression made it clear he already knew the answer and simply enjoyed hearing it said. "Liquidation of personal assets to cover transition costs." The lawyer's voice was flat, professional, the voice of a man who had removed his conscience from the equation long ago. "The family estate. His mother's house in the hills outside Budapest. The personal trusts. Everything not under the corporate umbrella gets absorbed. We strip him completely. He walks away with the sale price and nothing else. No home, no inheritance, nothing his family built before the company." Livia's hand went still on the water pitcher. The ice in it clicked softly against the crystal. She did not look up. She kept her face arranged in the smooth, neutral expression of someone doing a job. Someone who was not there. Someone who did not understand a single word being spoken. But her heart was doing something violent and loud inside her chest. They were not buying his company. They were planning to erase him. To take the money, and then take everything that existed before the money. His mother's home. His family's history. Everything he had not yet lost. And Victor, reaching for the pen on the table, did not know. "If I sign this," Victor said in English, his voice careful, "the hostility ends. My family is kept out of it. You want the company, not my personal." "Completely," Pendleton said. His sincerity was extraordinary. It was the sincerity of someone who had practiced it until it became structural. "This is just business, Victor. We respect the Molnar name. We want the shipping routes. Nothing else." Victor uncapped the pen. The tip hovered over the signature line. Livia stood with the water pitcher in her hands and understood that she had approximately 4 seconds to make a decision that would determine everything. If she spoke, Preston would fire her before she finished the sentence. If she made a scene, Pendleton would have her removed. She would lose the job, the tips, the rent, all of it tonight, and she would still be evicted tomorrow morning with the added bonus of being blacklisted from every upscale restaurant in London. She looked at Victor's hand holding the pen. She thought about what she had heard about Clause 14. She thought about a house in the hills outside Budapest that belonged to his mother. She thought about the red notice on her own kitchen counter, about her mother's medical debts, about what it felt like to have something taken from you that someone else decided you did not deserve to keep. She did not think about it for more than 2 seconds. Livia reached across the table to refill the lawyer's water glass. She let her elbow catch the edge of the heavy crystal pitcher just enough. It was precise. It looked like an accident because she had 3 seconds to commit to it completely. The pitcher went over. Ice water, cold and absolute, flooded across the tablecloth, across the lawyer's hands, across Pendleton's lap, and directly onto the open pages of the contract. "You stupid!" Pendleton was on his feet before the last drop fell, his face going from composed to ugly in the time it took to stand up. "Look what you've done. This suit is... Oh my God." Livia was already grabbing napkins, pressing them onto the spreading puddle onto the contract pages, where the ink was beginning to bleed and run, making the mess considerably worse with every motion. "I am so sorry I tripped. I am so clumsy. Please let me help." "Get away from me," Pendleton snapped, grabbing her wrist and pushing her hand back. "Manager, where is the manager? I want this woman removed right now." Preston materialized at a speed that suggested he had been 3 feet away for the entirety of this conversation. His face had achieved a shade of gray that Livia had not seen on a living person before. "Mr. Pendleton, I am horrified. I am mortified. Young, step back right now. You are finished. Do you hear me? Get out of my... Victor." Pendleton turned back to the table, his composure partially reconstructed. "We need to reprint the contract. Come with us to the hotel. The business center can have a new copy in 20 minutes. Victor had not moved. He was sitting very still, watching Livia. She was dabbing at the ruined document with a fistful of white linen napkins, and for just a moment, in the gap between Preston yelling and Pendleton redirecting, she looked directly at Victor. Her eyes were wide. Urgent. Not sorry. Not panicked. Communicating. She leaned in to blot a spot of water near his side of the table. Her voice was barely a breath, and it was in Hungarian, and it was the fastest she had ever spoken in her life. "Do not sign. Page 7, Clause 14. They take your mother's estate. Personal assets liquidation. It is written into the transfer. They are taking everything. It is a trap." Victor did not move, did not blink. His expression did not change by a single degree, but something behind his eyes did. She saw it. The specific shift of a man receiving intelligence he was not prepared for and processing it in real time with everything he had. "The contract is ruined," the lawyer said, lifting the soaked pages with 2 fingers, his voice thin with controlled fury. "We need to go now. The vote is in 38 minutes. "Victor," Pendleton said, his voice hardening for the first time into something that dropped the pretense entirely. "Now." Victor stood. He picked up the glass of vodka which had survived the flood untouched, and he took a slow, deliberate sip. "No," he said. The word was quiet. It was also the single most dangerous thing Livia had heard spoken in that room all night, and she had been in the room for most of it. Pendleton's smile did not disappear. It calcified. "I beg your pardon. I said no." Victor set the glass down. "I am not going to your hotel. I am not signing your contract. And I am not doing either of those things tonight or any other night." "Victor." Pendleton's voice dropped to something with edges in it. "The board vote happens in 38 minutes whether you are in the room or not. You don't have the documents. You don't have the votes. You are going to lose everything anyway. The only difference is whether you walk away with money or with nothing." "I almost walked away with nothing," Victor said. His eyes moved to Livia for a fraction of a second. "Clause 14 is a particular touch, Arthur. My mother's home, her estate. That is the kind of detail that tells you everything about the kind of man you are dealing with." He watched Pendleton's expression shift, watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, watched him look at Livia and start to understand what had just occurred. "Do not point at her," Victor said. "She barely speaks English, let alone the dialect of thieves." He turned to Preston. "Manager." Preston made a sound that was not quite a word. "This woman," Victor said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone making a statement for a record that will be referenced later, "just saved me from a $1 billion mistake. If you fire her for the water, I will purchase this building, demolish it, and dedicate the empty lot to public use. Do we understand each other?" Preston's clipboard hit the floor. He left it there. "Get out of my sight, Arthur," Victor said, turning back to Pendleton. "The deal is finished. Tell the board I am calling an emergency shareholder meeting and initiating the poison pill defense myself. If I fall, the stock price falls with me. Let's find out how your investors feel about that particular outcome." It was a bluff. Livia could hear it, the slight thinness under the absolute delivery. But it landed like it was made of concrete. Pendleton stared at him. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by something that was closer to hatred than anything that had been in the room all evening. He picked up the briefcase. He looked at Livia one more time and what was in that look made her take a half step backward without deciding to. "This is not finished, Molnar." "It never is," Victor said pleasantly. "Goodbye, Arthur." Pendleton walked out. The lawyer followed. The room let out a breath it had been holding for 10 minutes. And then Victor Molnar looked at Livia, and all the steel and the performance and the cold precision of the last 5 minutes dropped away in a single exhale. And what was underneath was a man who had 18 minutes left on a clock that was still running and absolutely no way to stop it from where he was standing. "I need a phone," he said quietly. "A landline. Something old. Something that cannot be traced or jammed. And I need it in the next 2 minutes." Livia was already untying her apron. "The basement office," she said. "Preston has a copper wire authorization line. It is completely off-network. Take me there. I am on shift. Livia." He said her name like he had known it for years. "I am not asking you as a customer. I am asking you as a man who is about to lose his family's entire history. Help me." She looked at him. She looked at the door where Pendleton had just exited. She dropped her apron on the table. "Follow me," she said. "And keep up." They moved toward the kitchen at a pace that was not quite running, and Livia did not look back at Preston because she already knew what his face looked like, and she did not need to see it again. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing yet, was that Arthur Pendleton had not gone to his car. He had stopped just outside the service entrance, made one phone call, and sent 2 people back inside through the rear door that the kitchen staff always left propped open because the ventilation was poor. They were already in the building, and they were moving fast. They went through the kitchen at a pace that made Jean-Luc spin around from his station with a ladle in his hand and an expression of pure outrage that neither of them acknowledged. Livia pushed through the swing door at the back of the prep area, the one that led to the service corridor, and Victor followed close enough that she could hear his breathing controlled but fast, the breathing of a man running a calculation that kept coming up short. The stairwell was narrow and poorly lit, and smelled like decades of steam and old pipe insulation. Their footsteps echoed. "The treasurer's name is Marcus Reed," Victor said as they descended. "He is the one person on the board who is not in Pendleton's pocket. If I can reach him directly, he can trigger an emergency pause on the vote. It buys me time to get the documentation through another channel." "How much time do you need?" "Enough to prove the fraud. The clause alone is not enough. I need the original contract draft, the one without the revision to prove it was inserted after the initial agreement." "Where is it?" "My legal office in Budapest, which is 1,100 miles away and completely inaccessible to me in the next 15 minutes. He said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. "One call to Marcus is all I need. One call to pause the vote, and I have until morning." They reached the bottom of the stairs. The office door was at the end of the corridor, the one labeled "Private" in faded stenciling that Preston treated like a state secret. Livia had her master key out before they reached it. She pushed the door open, and Victor moved past her to the desk. The phone was exactly as she had described it. Heavy beige, rotary style, a relic that Preston had refused to replace for 11 years on the grounds that it worked, and therefore did not need to be touched. It was wired directly into the building's copper authorization line, completely isolated from the restaurant's Wi-Fi network, invisible to anything digital. Victor snatched the receiver. He began dialing from memory a long international sequence that he entered without hesitation or error. He pressed the phone to his ear. Livia stood by the door and listened to the silence of the corridor above them. "Marcus," Victor said, his voice shifting into the rapid, precise register of a man who has exactly one chance to say something important. "Listen to me carefully. The Apex contract is fraudulent. They inserted a liquidation clause after the initial agreement. Personal assets, family estate, everything outside the corporate structure. I need you to trigger the emergency pause. Article 9. Do it now before the vote opens." A pause. Victor's jaw tightened. "I know what time it is, Marcus. I am telling you the offer is built on bad faith. I have a witness who heard the clause discussed by Pendleton and his lawyer in explicit terms. Trigger the pause, and I will have documentation to you by morning. If you do not, and the vote goes through, you will spend the next 3 years in depositions explaining why you approved a fraudulent merger." Another pause. Shorter. "Thank you," Victor said. "Do not let Pendleton speak. Remove him if you have to." He lowered the receiver slightly, and for just a moment his eyes closed. The relief was physical. Livia could see it move through his shoulders. That was when she heard the footsteps. Not the kitchen staff. She knew the sound of kitchen staff, the soft-soled shoes, the quick shuffle of people carrying things. These were different, deliberate, measured. The footsteps of people who were not lost and were not browsing. Two pairs, coming down the stairs. "They're here," she said. Victor's eyes opened. He looked at her. He looked at the phone still in his hand. "Marcus, I need 30 more seconds," he said into the receiver, his voice dropping. "Do not hang up." The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairwell. Then the corridor light shifted, blocked by something large standing in front of it. The office door came open hard. It was not Pendleton. Pendleton was the kind of man who sent people through doors he was not willing to go through himself. The two men who entered were the kind of people Pendleton kept for exactly that purpose. The younger one, the lawyer named Simon Vane, had lost the professional polish entirely. The other was built like a structural element, broad and expressionless, the bodyguard who had been stationed outside the restaurant entrance all evening. Vane looked at the phone in Victor's hand. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver device, no larger than a television remote, and flipped a switch on its side. The phone in Victor's hand emitted a high flat whine. The dial tone underneath it collapsed into static. "Signal jammer," Vane said pleasantly. "Works on copper lines too if you have the right frequency, which we do." He tucked it back into his pocket. "The board is sitting down right now, Victor. You called Marcus, which was smart, but we have someone in that room too, and that call is not going to accomplish what you think it is. Put the phone down." Victor set the receiver down on the desk. He did not look at Livia. "You're trespassing," Livia said. Her voice surprised her with how steady it was. Vane looked at her with the specific contempt of someone who has just been spoken to by an object he did not know could produce sound. "You are significantly out of your depth. Step aside, and this doesn't involve you." "She is the only person in this building acting with any integrity," Victor said, and his voice had gone very quiet in the way that Livia had already learned meant something considerably louder was coming. "Which makes her considerably more dangerous than you, Simon." "Dangerous." Vane repeated the word like he was tasting it. He checked his watch. "You have 6 minutes before the digital signatures go live. After that, you can tell your story to whoever handles corporate bankruptcy. I genuinely do not care." He nodded to the bodyguard. "Disconnect the phone from the wall." The bodyguard moved around the desk toward the phone jack. Livia's eyes went to Preston's desk. The glass paperweight London skyline rendered in solid crystal sat on a stack of manila folders, where it had been sitting for approximately 4 years without ever being used for anything. She picked it up. "Stay back," she said. The bodyguard looked at her and produced a small, completely humorless sound that was technically a laugh. He moved a step around her. Livia did not aim at him. She looked up at the ceiling at the sprinkler head directly above the desk at the small red glass bulb in its center, and she threw the paperweight as hard as she had ever thrown anything in her life. The bulb shattered. 1 second of absolute silence. Then the ceiling opened up. It was not the gentle mist of a modern sprinkler system. The pipes in the basement of the Kensington Royal had been installed during a period when fire suppression meant industrial volume, and they had been sitting full and pressurized and completely undisturbed for years. What came out of the ceiling was a torrent of black, stagnant, freezing water that hit every surface in the room simultaneously. The fire alarm began in the same instant, a piercing, rhythmic shriek that bounced off the concrete walls and made thought difficult and conversation nearly impossible. Vane screamed something that was lost in the alarm. He was drenched in seconds, his expensive suit plastered to him, his carefully arranged hair destroyed. He was shielding his face with his forearm and still holding the jammer, but his hand was shaking. The bodyguard moved forward anyway, slipping immediately on the concrete floor, which had gone slick with water and old grease from years of kitchen runoff through the pipes. His feet went out. His enormous frame hit the metal filing cabinet on the way down with a sound like a car accident, and he stayed down. "The lift," Livia said. Victor was already moving. They went into the corridor, which was flooding fast water running down the stairs in a thin, dark sheet. The service lift was at the far end, a rusted metal cage used for moving laundry between floors, operated by a button panel that looked like it had been installed when the building was new and the monarchy was young. Livia hit the call button. The lift was already on their level. She pulled the gate open, they stepped in, and she pulled it shut behind them, just as Vane came through the office doorway. Soaked and furious, the jammer still in his hand. His fingers caught in the mesh of the gate as she slammed it. She hit the button for the upper floor. The lift groaned, lurched, began to rise. Vane's hand pulled back. He was yelling something. It was completely inaudible under the fire alarm. Victor was pressing his back against the wall of the lift. His suit ruined his hair, destroyed water running down his face. He looked at Livia with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not gratitude exactly. Something closer to disbelief. "The jammer," she said, her voice raised over the alarm. "Does it work on this circuit?" "The emergency panel," he said. "Where?" She ripped the plastic cover off the intercom panel on the lift wall. Inside was a handset, industrial-grade direct copper wire connection to the building's fire safety circuit, which by legal requirement connected to a manned security station. "It bypasses everything," she said. "The fire code requires it." Victor grabbed the handset. A voice answered in 3 seconds. "Security Central, state your emergency. This is Victor Molnar." His voice had recovered completely. Every trace of the exhausted, wet-cornered man was gone, replaced by something that sounded like it had been forged rather than grown. "Authorization code Blue 7 Alpha 9er. I am under physical assault at the Kensington Royale. I need immediate connection to the board of Molnar Industries. Emergency override. Do it now." A pause that lasted 4 seconds and felt considerably longer. "Identity confirmed, Mr. Molnar. Connecting." The lift crawled upward. The alarm continued below them, distant now muffled. Livia stood with her back against the opposite wall and watched Victor's face while he waited for the connection, and she thought about the sprinkler water soaking through her uniform and the fact that she had just destroyed a piece of fire suppression infrastructure and assaulted a bodyguard with a decorative paperweight, and she felt improbably completely calm. "Victor." The voice that came through was male and strained the voice of a man in a room full of people who were all trying to speak at once. "We were 60 seconds from the vote. Where are you?" "Marcus." Victor's grip on the handset tightened. "Cancel the vote. I am invoking the Wolf's Clause. The Apex offer is fraudulent. I have a witness and physical evidence of bad faith negotiation. The contract contains a personal asset liquidation clause that was not present in the original agreement. If Pendleton is in that room, have security remove him before he touches anything." Noise on the other end of the line. A raised voice that sounded like it might belong to Pendleton, followed by the sound of a room deciding something. "Victor." Marcus again slightly breathless. "The clock was at 0. You made it by 12 seconds. The lift stopped. Victor lowered the handset. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal wall of the lift and stayed there for a moment without speaking. The handset swung gently on its cord. Below them distantly, the fire alarm was still shrieking. Livia watched him. She did not say anything. Some moments do not require commentary. When he lifted his head, his eyes were clear. Clearer than they had been all evening. Clearer than they had been when she first saw him in the dining room, all contained fury and barely suppressed exhaustion. Something had released. 12 seconds, he said. "You made it," she said. "We made it." He looked at her. Really looked at her the way he had looked at her when she first spoke Hungarian, with that quality of genuine attention that powerful people almost never gave to anyone they had not decided was worth their time. "Livia, you broke a sprinkler with a paperweight." "I broke the sprinkler head," she corrected. "The sprinkler system did the rest. Technically, I just made a structural suggestion." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something warmer than the ghost of a smile he had produced earlier. "Your grandmother taught you that too?" he asked. "My grandmother taught me that sometimes the most effective solution is the one that makes the problem impossible to continue," Livia said. She was usually talking about arguments, but the principle applies. He looked at the handset still swinging on its cord. He looked at Livia's uniform, soaked and dark, her hair completely undone from whatever it had been when the evening started. He looked at his own hands, the tattoos on his forearms, dark against his skin, the tailored jacket destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. "They will come after you," he said. "Pendleton does not lose gracefully. He will claim you interfered with a legal business negotiation. He will make it about the spilled contract and the sprinkler and whatever else his lawyers can attach to it." "I know," Livia said. "You knew that when you spilled the water." "Yes." "And you did it anyway." She met his eyes. "You were about to lose your mother's house, Mr. Molnar. I have spent 2 years watching what it does to a person when they lose the last thing that connects them to someone they loved. I was not going to stand 3 feet away and let that happen to someone else because I was worried about a job. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in the evening. It did not have tension in it. It had weight. The weight of something that had been said and could not be unsaid. The weight of two people standing in a ruined elevator after surviving something together, soaked and tired and more honest with each other than either of them had been with anyone in a long time. Victor reached into the inner pocket of his destroyed jacket. He produced a small laminated card, water-spotted but intact, a single gold-embossed number on an otherwise plain surface. He held it out to her. "Thomas," he said. "My lawyer, not Sterling. Sterling is an idiot, Thomas. He will call you tomorrow morning. Do not ignore the call." Livia took the card. "Mr. Molnar, I do not need a lawyer. I need my landlord to return my deposit, and I need to get through next month's rent. That is the full extent of my current ambitions." "I know," Victor said. "And that is exactly why I am giving you his number." He paused. "Pendleton is going to be arrested before morning. The board is going to vote to pursue fraud charges. When that happens, every piece of this evening becomes a matter of legal record. You are a witness. Thomas will make sure that is the only role you play and that you are protected while you play it." She looked at the card in her hand. She looked at him. "And Preston," she said. "He told me to leave before you were even finished eating." Something shifted in Victor's expression. Not warmth exactly. Something with an edge under it, the specific expression of a man who has not forgotten a single thing that happened this evening and has already begun to decide what to do about it. "Go home tonight," Victor said. "Take a hot bath, throw away the uniform, and tomorrow when Thomas calls, answer the phone." The lift gate opened onto the upper corridor. Victor stepped out, then turned back to look at her one more time. "And Livia," he said. "The stew was perfectly salted." She watched him walk down the corridor toward the front entrance, his phone already at his ear, his voice shifting into the language of a man who had just survived something and was not done yet. She stood in the lift alone for a moment. The alarm had gone quiet. The building felt very still. Somewhere below her she knew there was a flooded basement, a ruined office, an extremely angry lawyer with wet shoes, and Preston Giles, who was about to discover that the evening had moved considerably beyond anything his clipboard was equipped to manage. She pressed the button for the ground floor. She had no idea, standing in that lift with a gold-embossed card in her hand, what the next 2 weeks were going to look like. She did not know about the newspaper headlines, or the arrest, or the phone call from Thomas that would last 40 minutes, or the document that would arrive by courier to her apartment on a Tuesday morning, with her name on it, and the words "Managing Director" printed beneath. She did not know any of that yet. What she knew was that she was soaking wet. She was almost certainly fired, and for the first time in 2 years, the feeling sitting in her chest was not dread. It was something she barely recognized. It felt like the very beginning of something. The ground floor of the Kensington Royal was a different country from the one Livia had left 20 minutes earlier. The fire alarm had stopped, but its absence felt provisional, like a held breath. The kitchen staff stood in the corridor outside the swing doors, in a loose cluster. Some of them still holding utensils. All of them looking at Livia as she stepped off the service lift in her ruined uniform, with the particular expression of people who had heard enough from below to understand that something significant had occurred, but not enough to know exactly what. Jean-Luc was at the front of the group, his tweezers still in his hand, his face cycling through indignation and curiosity in roughly equal measure. "What happened to the basement?" he said. "Sprinkler malfunction," Livia said, walking past him. "Malfunction," Jean-Luc repeated, looking at the state of her uniform. "That is one word for it." She pushed through the swing doors into the dining room. The room had thinned. Several tables had paid and left during the chaos, unwilling to sit through a fire alarm and whatever had preceded it. The ones who remained were leaned toward each other in the specific posture of people who had witnessed something they had not paid for and were determined to extract full value from it before they left. The candles were still burning. The chandelier still threw its expensive light across the marble. Everything looked the same. Everything was completely different. Preston Giles was standing at the host's stand with the phone pressed to his ear and the expression of a man receiving news that was actively restructuring his understanding of his own future. He saw Livia come through the kitchen door, and he lowered the phone without saying goodbye to whoever was on the other end. He looked at her uniform. He looked at her hair. He looked at the gold-embossed card she was still holding in her left hand. "That card," Preston said. His voice was strange, thin in a new way. "Is that from him?" "His lawyer will be in contact with the restaurant tomorrow," Livia said. "I would suggest making sure all employment records are current and accurate." "Livia." Preston set the phone down on the host stand. He straightened his jacket with both hands, a gesture so automatic it was almost sad. "You have to understand the position I was in tonight, the pressure I was under. When I told you to go back to the terrace, I was protecting you. A man like Molnar, you do not just send a terrace." "Preston," Livia said. "Stop talking." He stopped talking. She walked to the coat hook near the service entrance, took her bag from the peg where she had left it 4 hours earlier, which felt like a different geological era, and she walked out of the Kensington Royal. The night air hit her like cold water, which given the state of her uniform was almost redundant. She stood on the pavement outside the service entrance and looked at the card in her hand for a long moment. Then she put it in her bag, zipped the bag closed, and started walking toward the tube. She did not know that 40 feet away in a black car parked at the corner of the block, Arthur Pendleton was sitting in the back seat with a phone to his ear and his eyes fixed on the service entrance door. She did not know that he watched her walk away. She did not know what he said into the phone after she turned the corner. She did not know any of that yet. But she would. The call from Thomas came at 8:14 the following morning. Livia was sitting at her kitchen table in dry clothes with a cup of tea she had not yet drunk, staring at the red eviction notice that was still on her counter. She had been awake since 5. She had not slept so much as lain very still with her eyes closed and her mind running at a speed that made rest impossible. When the phone rang, the number was a London area code she did not recognize. "Oh, Miss Young," said this voice on the other end. It was calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who existed at a different pace from the rest of the world. "My name is Thomas Brennan. I am Mr. Molnar's legal counsel. I believe he mentioned I would be calling." "He mentioned it," Livia said. "Good. I need approximately 40 minutes of your time, and I want to begin by telling you that you do not need your own lawyer present for this conversation, though you are welcome to obtain one before we speak formally. What I am about to tell you is at this stage informational." Livia picked up the tea. It was cold. She drank it anyway. "Tell me." Thomas told her. Arthur Pendleton had been removed from the board meeting the previous evening by security, which had created a scene significant enough that 3 board members had recorded it on their phones. Simon Vane, the lawyer, had been detained by Metropolitan Police at 7:45 that morning on charges that Thomas described as substantial and did not elaborate on further. The signal jammer recovered from the basement office of the Kensington Royal had been flagged as a restricted device, the kind that required specific licensing that Vane did not possess. The fraud charges related to the contract clause were being processed at a speed that Thomas indicated was unusual, the implication being that Victor Molnar's legal team had spent the night doing the work of several weeks. "What does this mean for me?" Livia asked. "It means that your account of the evening will be required as part of the formal complaint," Thomas said. "It also means that Mr. Pendleton is aware of your role, which is why I am calling early. His personal legal team reached out to the Kensington Royal this morning at 6 a.m. with a letter of intent to pursue civil action against a member of their service staff for interference with a legal business negotiation and deliberate destruction of property." Livia set the cup down. "He is coming after me," she said. "He is attempting to," Thomas said. "The letter names you specifically. It also names the restaurant, which is where the situation becomes interesting." "Interesting how? The Kensington Royal changed ownership at midnight last night," Thomas said. "The holding company that acquired it is registered to a private trust that Mr. Molnar controls through a subsidiary. Legally speaking, any civil action against a member of that restaurant's staff now involves litigation against a company backed by Victor Molnar's personal legal and financial resources." A pause. Mr. Pendleton's lawyers withdrew the letter by 7:30 this morning. Livia sat with this for a moment. "He bought the restaurant," she said. Not a question. "He bought the restaurant," Thomas confirmed. "He also asked me to convey that your position there, should you want it, is not terrace service." The managing director conversation happened 3 days later in a coffee shop 2 streets from the restaurant, because Victor Molnar's office had called and asked where she wanted to meet, and she had said somewhere without marble floors, and his assistant had paused for exactly 1 second before saying she would arrange it. Victor arrived without the bodyguards. He was in a dark jacket over a white shirt open at the collar, the tattoos visible at his neck and along his forearms, the same controlled, deliberate way of moving, but something in his face was different from the evening at the restaurant. The stress lines around his eyes had softened. He did not scan the room when he walked in. He saw Livia at the corner table and walked directly to her. "You look better than the last time I saw you," he said, sitting down. "The bar was fairly low," she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes this time. "Thomas tells me Pendleton's team folded before breakfast. Thomas tells me you bought the restaurant before midnight. I was motivated." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup that appeared in front of him, which he had not ordered, but which the server, a young woman who had clearly been briefed, had placed there without being asked. "I want to talk about what comes next, for the restaurant and for you specifically." "You do not owe me anything," Livia said. "I know I don't." Victor looked at her directly. "That is not what this conversation is about. What I owe you and what I want to offer you are two entirely different things, and I want you to understand the difference before you decide anything." He set the cup down. "The restaurant needs someone who understands both rooms, the kitchen and the dining room, the staff and the guests, someone who understands that the value of a place is not in the marble on the floor, but in what happens at the tables." He paused. "Managing director, hospitality wing, full authority, salary that is not what they were paying you to serve salads to tourists." Livia looked at him. "I dropped out of Oxford 2 years ago. I have been a waitress. I do not have the credentials for—" "You speak 4 languages," Victor said. "You read a room better than anyone I have employed at any level. You identified a fraudulent contract clause in a language you were not supposed to speak under pressure in 30 seconds, and you acted on it at personal cost. That is not something a credential gives you. That is something you either have or you do not." He leaned forward slightly. "I do not make offers I have not thought through, and I do not offer positions to people I am not certain can hold them." Livia was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, London was doing what London did, moving fast and gray and indifferent to individual moments of significance. "The staff stew stays on the menu," she said finally. Victor's expression shifted into something that was not quite amusement and was considerably warmer. "I was told it is already on the draft menu for the relaunch. The Borderlands stew, most expensive item on the card. 10% to the Immigrant Scholarship Fund, already in the operating agreement." She looked at him. "You did all of this before you called me." "I wanted to be certain I had something worth offering before I offered it." He picked up his coffee. "The position is real. The terms are in writing. Thomas has the paperwork. If you want time to think about it, take the time. If you have conditions, tell me. I am not Preston Giles. I do not negotiate from pressure." Livia thought about the red envelope on her kitchen counter. She thought about her mother's medical files in the box under her bed. The stack of debt notices she had been paying down 1 month at a time for 2 years, slowly and steadily, and with the specific endurance of someone who had decided that survival was a full-time commitment. She thought about Oxford, about the linguistics lecture she had been sitting in when the hospital called about the particular feeling of walking out of a place you had worked for and giving back the scholarship card, and knowing that the door you were walking through only went one direction. "There is one more thing," Victor said. His voice had changed, slightly quieter. The transactional register was gone. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set an envelope on the table between them. It was thick, official. Her name was printed on the front in the kind of typeface that legal documents used. "Open it," he said. Livia picked it up. She opened it. The document inside was 3 pages. She read the first paragraph. Then she read it again. Then she set it flat on the table because her hands had started doing something she was not prepared to manage in a public setting. It was a property deed. The address was in the Oxfordshire countryside, a house her mother had owned and lost to foreclosure 18 months ago, 2 weeks before she died, the single worst administrative cruelty of a period that had been defined by cruelty. Livia had not been able to stop it. She had been 3 payments behind, and the bank had moved faster than her ability to catch up, and she had stood in the empty rooms of that house on a Tuesday afternoon and said goodbye to the last physical place that held her mother's life in its walls. The deed had her name on it. It was current. It was paid in full. "Victor," she said. Her voice came out different from the way she intended. It took some finding, he said simply. The bank that foreclosed was not enthusiastic about the conversation. They became more enthusiastic when Thomas joined it. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who understands grief because he has carried his own version of it for a long time. You told me your grandmother taught you that a man who shouts at the staff is usually afraid of losing something. You were right. I was afraid of losing my mother's house. You stopped that from happening. It seemed appropriate. Livia pressed her fingers flat against the deed on the table and concentrated on breathing at a normal rate. I did not do it for this, she said. I know, Victor said. In my world, everyone who helps me has a calculation behind it. Something they want, something they are positioning for. He looked at the deed, then at her. You are the first person in a very long time who helped me because it was the right thing to do. Not because of what I am, or what I control, or what I might give them afterward. He paused. A person like that is worth considerably more than a house. But the house was available, and the other thing is not something I can put in an envelope. Livia looked up at him. What is the other thing? Victor was quiet for a moment. Outside, a bus went past. Someone's phone rang at the next table and was quickly silenced. Respect, he said finally. Real respect. The kind that does not come with conditions attached. He stood adjusting his jacket. I have a flight to Budapest in 2 hours. There is a meeting of the full board tomorrow, and I intend to be in the room for it in a considerably better position than I was last night. He picked up his coffee, finished it, set the cup down. Thomas will have the employment paperwork at your apartment by this afternoon. Read it. Change anything you want to change. There is nothing in it that is not negotiable. He was halfway to the door when Livia found her voice. The cousin, she said. You mentioned a cousin in Budapest. Who wants to study linguistics? Victor stopped. He turned. She is 17, he said. Brilliant. Stubborn. She reminds me of someone I have recently met. Something in his expression shifted towards something almost fond. I told her I know the best mentor in London, if you are willing. Livia looked at the deed on the table. She looked at the gold-embossed card she had transferred to her jacket pocket that morning. She thought about Oxford, about linguistics lectures, about the particular pleasure of a language opening itself up to you like a system of locked rooms where you had just found all the keys. Send her my number, Livia said. Victor nodded. Just once. Then he walked out of the coffee shop and into the gray London morning, and Livia sat alone at the corner table with a property deed under her hands and a future that looked nothing like the one she had been carrying yesterday. She sat there for a long time. She did not look at her phone. She did not make a plan. She just sat with it, with the weight of a document that gave her back something she had thought was permanently gone, and she let herself feel it without trying to manage it into something more practical. Then she picked up her bag. She put the deed carefully inside. She stood up. She had a restaurant to run. The employment paperwork arrived at Livia's apartment at 2:47 that afternoon, delivered by a courier who asked for her signature with the specific deference of someone who had been briefed on who they were delivering to. The envelope was thick. The contract inside was 41 pages. Thomas had included a handwritten note on his firm's letterhead that said simply, "Everything is negotiable. Call me if you have questions, and congratulations." Livia read every page. She changed 3 things. She sent it back. Thomas called within the hour to say the changes had been approved without discussion. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and looked at the red eviction notice still on the counter, and she peeled it off the surface, slowly folded it in half, and dropped it in the bin. Then she went to bed and slept for 11 hours without dreaming. The first morning she walked into the Kensington Royal as managing director, she did not announce herself. She arrived 20 minutes before the staff briefing was scheduled to begin, let herself in through the front entrance with the key Thomas had couriered the previous day, and stood alone in the dining room for a few minutes in the quiet before the day started. The marble was the same. The chandeliers were the same. Table 4 was the same set for service with a white cloth and a single candle that was not yet lit. She had stood in this room terrified 3 weeks ago. She stood in it now and felt something entirely different. Not power exactly. Something quieter. The specific steadiness of a person who has passed through something difficult and come out on the other side knowing more about themselves than they did going in. The staff filed in at 8. She heard them before she saw them. The particular sound of people who do not yet know what they are walking into. Voices, low shoes on marble. the shuffle of people preparing to perform whatever version of themselves the morning required. She was standing at the host stand when they came through the door. Gregory saw her first. His face did the thing faces do when the brain receives information. It was not prepared for a rapid series of micro-expressions that moved through disbelief and embarrassment and landed somewhere in the vicinity of genuine fear. Then Preston walked in. Preston Giles, who had been floor manager of the Kensington Royal for 9 years, who had wielded his clipboard and his cologne and his contempt like a set of personal weapons, who had told Livia she was late in spirit and that her mediocrity was a liability, and to go back to the terrace and stay there. Preston walked through the door of his restaurant and looked at the woman standing at the host stand in a tailored navy suit with her hair swept back and a leather briefcase on the counter beside her, and his face went the specific color of a man whose understanding of cause and consequence has just been revised without warning. The clipboard slipped from his hand. It hit the marble. Nobody picked it up. "Preston," Livia said. Her voice was level, pleasant even. "Good morning." His mouth opened, closed. You, actually." He looked around the room as though hoping someone would confirm that he was experiencing a medical event rather than reality. "You bought it, you." "Mr. Molnar bought it," Livia said. "I manage it, which means that effective today I manage you." She looked at the assembled staff at Gregory's fixed expression of a man trying to become invisible at the junior servers, who were watching with the barely suppressed attention of people witnessing something they would describe in detail to every person they knew for the next several years. "There are going to be changes. I'll go through them now." She went through them. The staff stew. Now the Borderlands. Stew on the permanent menu. Most expensive item on the card. 10% of proceeds to the Immigrant Scholarship Fund. Wages increased 20% across the board effective immediately. A new conduct standard that she described in specific terms. No staff member would be made to feel disposable. No guest would be treated as more important than the person serving them, and anyone who could not operate within those terms was welcome to find a different position elsewhere. Then she looked at Preston. "You are not fired," she said. Preston made a sound that was almost relief. "You are the new terrace service lead," Livia continued. "You will be taking tables. Tourist tables, anniversary dinners, influencers with cameras. You will pour the water and carry the plates and smile until your jaw aches, and if I receive a single complaint from a single member of your section about how they were spoken to or looked at or made to feel, you will be cleaning the grease traps personally." She paused. "Do you understand?" Preston looked at her for a long moment. Something complicated moved across his face. She expected anger. She expected the puffed-up indignation of a man whose pride had been structurally compromised. What she saw instead, which surprised her, was something closer to the specific exhaustion of a person who has been performing a version of themselves they do not particularly like for a very long time and has just been handed an exit from it. "Yes," he said quietly. "I understand." She nodded. "Good. You start at 11. The morning moved fast after that. There were contractors arriving to assess the basement restoration because the sprinkler situation had left the basement office requiring complete replumbing, which Livia had already gotten a quote on and approved without losing sleep over it. There was a call from Thomas to confirm that Pendleton's legal team had made no further contact since the withdrawal of the civil letter. There was Jean-Luc, who knocked on the door of what was now her office at 10 and stood there with his tweezers in his hand and an expression that was as close to humble as his face had apparently ever been configured. "The stew," he said. "I want to plate it properly. If it is going on the menu as the premier item, I want to do it right. I want to use the good bowls." "Use whatever bowls you think are right," Livia said. "But it has to taste exactly the same. No refinements, no microgreens." Jean-Luc looked briefly pained. "No microgreens," he agreed. He left. She had the distinct impression she had just won a negotiation she had not known she was in. By early afternoon, the dining room was open and running, and Livia was moving through it with the quiet attention of someone learning the texture of a thing they now owned a stake in. She stopped at tables. She talked to guests. Not the performance of talking to guests that Preston had trained the staff to do, but actual conversation, the kind her grandmother had taught her, where you looked at the person and listened to what they were saying, and responded to that specifically rather than to the idea of them. An older woman at table 9, eating alone, celebrating what she told Livia was her 43rd wedding anniversary by coming to the restaurant where she and her husband had eaten on their first trip to London 30 years before he died. Livia sat with her for 4 minutes and listened to the story of a man she had never met and would never meet, and it was the best 4 minutes of the working day. She was coming out of the kitchen at 2:30 when her phone buzzed. The number was a Budapest area code. She stepped into the corridor and answered, "Miss Young." The voice was Young. 17 exactly as Victor had said, quick and bright and slightly breathless with the specific energy of someone who has been working up to a phone call for longer than they would admit. "This is Kata Molnar. My cousin said I should call you. He said you were the best mentor in London for linguistics and that I should not be embarrassed to reach out because you would understand." A pause. "Are you really studying Hungarian legal dialect? Because I have been reading about the Carpathian Basin contract traditions, and I have so many questions that my professors here cannot answer. And I—" "Kata," Livia said. "Yes, slow down." She was smiling. She could hear it in her own voice, and she did not try to remove it. "Start from the beginning. Tell me what you are reading." The call lasted 47 minutes. By the end of it, Livia had recommended 3 books, given Kata the email address of a professor at Oxford who owed her a favor from a study group 3 years ago and agreed to a weekly call on Thursday evenings. When she hung up, she stood in the corridor for a moment. She thought about Victor, about a man who had won his board fight and secured his company and protected his mother's estate and was now apparently also arranging linguistics mentorships from his Budapest office in whatever gaps existed between running a global empire. She thought about the stew, about Tuesday nights and 1993, and the way a bowl of something honest could reach a person faster than anything expensive ever could. She was still thinking about it when her phone buzzed again. A text this time. Budapest number. 4 words. "How is the restaurant?" She typed back. "Ask me in 6 months." The response came in under 10 seconds. A single line. "I already know the answer." She put the phone in her pocket and walked back out into the dining room, where the Borderlands stew had just been ordered for the first time by a couple at table 7 who had asked the server what the most interesting thing on the menu was, and the server, a 22-year-old named Adayeze, who had been working the Kensington Royal for 3 months and had never once been asked her opinion by management until this morning, had said without hesitation, "The stew. Trust me on the stew." Livia watched the bowl go out. She watched the couple lean over it, curious, pulling the rich red smell toward themselves. She watched the woman take the first bite and close her eyes. She watched the man at the table say something to his wife and the wife laugh. Really laugh. The kind that was not performed for the room, but was just a person responding to something that caught them off guard with its realness. That was what a restaurant was supposed to do. Not impress. Not intimidate. Not make people feel the distance between themselves and the lives of people who could afford marble floors. A restaurant was supposed to make people feel something. Something warm. Something that reminded them of the version of their life they most wanted to live. Livia had understood that before she ever stepped foot in the Kensington Royal. She had understood it from her grandmother's kitchen, from 18 years of evenings that smelled like paprika, and the particular music of a language that refused to disappear, regardless of what country it found itself in. She had carried it through Oxford, and through grief, and through 2 years of counting tips on her walk home, and she had carried it to table 4 on the worst financial night of her life, and it had saved them both. 3 weeks ago, she had walked out of this building with a ruined uniform and a card with a gold-embossed number, and the knowledge that she was 24 hours from losing everything. This morning, she had walked back in holding the key. Not because someone had rescued her, not because a powerful man had decided she was worth saving, but because she had stood in the lion's den with shaking knees and a steady voice, and she had done the thing that needed doing and that had made all the difference. Preston Giles came through the terrace door at 3:30, carrying an empty tray and a water pitcher, and the specific expression of a man learning something about himself through direct experience. He saw Livia watching him from across the room. He straightened his spine. He did not say anything. She gave him a single nod. He gave her one back. Then he turned and went back to his section, because there were tables to serve and people to look after and a job to do, and the Kensington Royal, whatever it had been before, was not that place anymore. Livia Young had walked into this restaurant as someone the floor manager called invisible. She had left it once as someone who had changed the outcome of a billion-dollar war with a bowl of stew and a language she was never supposed to know. And she returned to it as the woman who decided every single day, going forward, what this place would be, and who it would serve, and what it would mean to the people who walked through its doors. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a room to finally see them. Livia Young stopped waiting, walked straight to the most dangerous table in the building, and made the room come to her.